Today, we are going to look at the worst deaths during outdoor adventures. From a professional rock climber that lost his grip plummeting himself to death, to a normal camping that resulted into campers' worst nightmare. Let's dive straight in. It was March 29, 2016, in Joshua Tree National Park, California. Morning light spread evenly over the tan granite formations, the kind that looked harmless until you were on them. Ryan Colton, 34, was a weekend climber and amateur gear reviewer from Bakersfield. He ran a modest YouTube channel where he tested budget-friendly equipment for everyday climbers. His videos rarely passed 1,000 views, but his audience valued his unpolished honesty. Colton worked weekdays as a warehouse technician and spent his weekends outdoors, filming quiet, methodical reviews that combined curiosity with an engineer's patience. He had developed a reputation among local climbers for testing real-world setups, worn carabiners, outdated bolts, budget ropes. The appeal of his channel was that he wasn't selling anything. For him, climbing was an outlet and an experiment, and his viewers trusted that he took safety seriously. He often filmed at Joshua Tree because the routes were short and accessible. That Tuesday, he planned to film a segment comparing aging expansion bolts to modern glue-ins. The setup was simple: demonstrate how older bolts weathered over decades of use, then show how newer systems solved those weaknesses. He'd already done multiple takes of close-ups and commentary, explaining oxidation patterns and stress points. To illustrate load response, he decided to lower himself gently on an anchor using an old bolt and a modern one side by side. The plan was to record nothing aggressive, just controlled testing. Several nearby climbers noticed him working solo, but assumed he was rehearsing a standard demonstration. One had seen him before and knew he rarely pushed beyond low-risk maneuvers. There were no weather issues, no visible warning signs, only faint surface rust on the upper bolt. Around 11:30 a.m., Colton adjusted his tripod, clipped in, and began narrating in his usual calm tone. He mentioned in the video that this is what mild corrosion looks like after 20-plus years, as he tapped the bolt with a carabiner for sound comparison. The footage reviewed later showed Colton easing his weight onto the anchor while continuing his explanation. As he shifted to demonstrate tension distribution, the old bolt emitted a sharp metallic crack. His right hand moved reflexively toward the rock, but his foot slipped against the slab's smooth surface. The camera stayed steady as his voice cut off mid-sentence and his torso dropped out of frame. Witnesses reported a short, clipped yell followed by the impact against the boulder field roughly 25 feet below. They immediately alerted the authorities. When rangers arrived within 15 minutes, Colton was unresponsive, having suffered severe internal trauma and multiple fractures. His harness remained intact. The newer glue-in bolt beside the failed one was undamaged. His camera had continued recording for over an hour after the fall, capturing only desert wind and the faint voices of responders below. The footage later confirmed that no deliberate risk or misuse occurred. The bolt had sheared at the shaft due to stress cracking and metal fatigue hidden beneath the surface sleeve. The official incident report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma resulting from anchor failure. Authorities conducted an inspection of similar hardware in the area, removing several aging bolts over the following weeks. His family retrieved his gear from park authorities the following month. The equipment was stored neatly, labeled with his handwriting. The footage was never uploaded. Rangers later described the accident as a rare but instructive reminder that even routine climbs depend on unseen metal. It was June 10, 2017, in Clear Creek Canyon, Colorado. Climbers filtered in early, scattering along the routes before the heat set in. Amongst them, a young woman was setting up her camera, tying in, smiling once toward the lens. Ava Rodriguez, 25, from Fort Collins, was an engineering student at Colorado State University and a part-time instructor at an indoor climbing gym. Her co-workers described her as focused and detail-oriented, someone who treated safety procedures like lab work. She'd started climbing 3 years earlier and found the sport a perfect balance of physical problem-solving and structure. She had been filming short clips of her climbs to analyze movement and anchor setup. The canyon offered short, approachable sport routes, most under 80 feet, equipped with modern glue-in bolts and steel anchors. For Rodriguez, These climbs were an extension of her academic mindset, measurable, repeatable tests of precision and control. Her plan that morning was to lead a moderately difficult route, challenging enough to test technique and focus, but well within her ability. She had completed it once before under supervision and planned to film the climb as a personal milestone. The route, called Pale Sun, was a vertical mix of small edges and shallow pockets, ending at a clean anchor ledge. Rodriguez parked near mile marker 263, hiked the short approach, and set up her phone in landscape mode on a flat rock ledge below. Her voice on the footage was steady but excited as she checked knots and clips. Authorities who reviewed the video later recalled her calm focus as she started upward, methodically clipping into each bolt. By the second anchor, she looked relaxed, pausing briefly to chalk up. Conditions were nearly perfect. Dry holds, no wind, temperature in the mid-70s. She was climbing alone under a mock lead setup, using a device modified for self-belay, a method she had practiced indoors for controlled tests. A few minutes later, she stopped to adjust the device for rope slack and to reposition for the next section. In the footage, she appeared momentarily distracted by a minor rope twist near her harness. During that short correction, she briefly released her brake hand to free the rope tail. Investigators later found that her figure-8 knot, though apparently dressed, had not been fully cinched before she began climbing, allowing gradual loosening as she moved. At the same time, another climber 2 pitches away noticed something off about the rope's angle, describing it later as moving strangely near her waist. Seconds later, Rodriguez reached to clip the next bolt, her body shifting slightly off balance. The rope slipped several inches through the knot as she weighted it, reducing friction. In the footage, the sound of her quick exhale was followed by a sharp gasp. Then, she dropped. The camera caught a blur of sky and canyon as she fell more than 60 feet, her scream cut short by the impact. The phone struck the rock and landed sideways. The climber on the opposite wall descended quickly and reached the base within minutes, allowing him to call for help. Rodriguez had fallen an estimated 70 feet. Her harness remained fastened, but the rope had come completely free from the tie-in. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene from blunt force trauma. The Jefferson County Sheriff's report ruled the cause as equipment mismanagement, noting no hardware failure. Investigators concluded the knot had been inadequately retightened after initial setup. Her family held a private memorial in Fort Collins the following week. The gym where she taught closed for 2 days, hosting a safety refresher in her name. Friends described her final moments as typical of her: methodical, serious, unshowy. It was September 14, 2015, on the limestone cliffs of Calavarques, Mallorca. The sea below was unusually calm for late summer. Far above, a pair of climbers moved in rhythm, careful, confident, unaware that one weakened strand of nylon would soon decide everything. Liam Fournier, 28, and his fiancée Elise Fournier, 30, had spent the last 3 years building a modest following online. Their YouTube channel featured short, unedited footage of climbing trips across Europe. Nothing flashy, just raw ascents and the occasional drone sweep over cliffs. Liam worked as an auto mechanic back home in Lyon, known for his patience and precision. Elise, a fitness trainer, handled most of the filming and logistics. Their partnership revolved around trust. She managed equipment. He led the routes. They checked every piece of gear before each climb, their harnesses, carabiners, and long climbing rope, and even kept spare equipment in their van just in case. They traveled on a budget, but kept their setup light for filming efficiency. Deep water soloing and sport climbing required awareness of both rock and tide. They'd learned to read cliff moisture to gauge the swell before moving. On this trip, they'd chosen Calavarques for its accessible overhangs and clear water, ideal for wide drone passes. That morning, they debated ending the trip after 3 days of successful filming, but the lighting that afternoon, diffuse clouds clearing to blue, was perfect for one final sequence. The plan was simple. Liam would lead a route called Via del Mar, with Elise belaying from a midpoint ledge. They'd film it in one continuous drone shot, capturing both climbers against the sea. In coastal crags like Calavarques, airborne salt and microscopic sand grains can also embed in rope sheaths. accelerating abrasion where the line contacts sharp limestone. They launched the drone at 2:14 p.m., calibrated it manually, and began climbing. The footage later reviewed by Spanish authorities showed Liam moving efficiently, clipping at regular intervals. Elise, steady below, managed the rope through her belay device while checking the drone's battery on her wrist monitor. Halfway up, the drone circled wide, revealing a clean shot of the cliff profile and a section where the rope crossed a sharp edge of limestone just below Liam's last quick draw. His harness tension pulled the rope tight against it. At 2:26 p.m., Liam reached a small rest hold, unweighted briefly, then shifted his weight upward to clip again. Out of nowhere, the drone camera jerked, first showing Liam's body dropping. Then Elise yanked upward and outward as the rope recoiled. Both fell nearly 100 feet. Liam's partial impact on a ledge likely reduced his velocity before he tumbled into the sea, but the secondary impact proved unsurvivable. Elise, pulled off her stance, fell cleanly into the same water seconds later. Two kayakers who saw everything reached the scene within minutes before calling for help. Liam was face down, unresponsive, near the ledge. Elise had drifted several meters out, tangled in slack rope. Neither showed signs of life when emergency crews arrived. Autopsies listed massive blunt force trauma as the cause of death for both. Their helmets and portions of rope were later found washed up near the southern inlet. The rope analysis confirmed fiber fatigue at a single abrasion point, consistent with repeated movement under tension. The Civil Guard investigation ruled the deaths accidental, citing rope failure from edge contact and humidity-induced softening. Technical inspectors later emphasized that dynamic climbing ropes can lose up to 70% of their original strength once the sheath is fully abraded through, a failure invisible until the final seconds. The recovered drone, salt-corroded but intact, was returned to Elise's brother. Its memory card contained 12 minutes of footage ending with static. In climbing circles, the couple's story circulated quietly, not as spectacle, but as a reminder that even the most careful systems can fail when conditions shift by inches. It was April 3, 2018, at a private outdoor training wall in St. George, Utah, the kind used by local youth climbers for practice. The red cliffs around Mose Valley glowed in the late afternoon light. On the northern wall, a single climber adjusted her helmet camera, talking quietly to herself before beginning her next lap. Kelsey Nyman was 19 and in the middle of her strongest season yet. A youth competitor from Salt Lake City, she had earned attention in the regional circuit for her deliberate, efficient style. She was disciplined in both climbing and training, the kind who logged every calorie, every minute on the hangboard. Between competitions, she worked part-time at a gear shop, using employee discounts to build her own kit. Lead climbing had become her main event. The routes demanded stamina, pacing, and constant awareness of clip placement. Most climbers relied on a partner for belay checks, but that day Kelsey was practicing alone, using an Autobelay setup and self-filming through a helmet-mounted GoPro. Her routine included analyzing footwork and movement timing later that night. The gear was standard: a harness, single dynamic rope, and preset anchors installed along the overhanging wall. However, the Autobelay device, a hydraulic-braked True Blue unit commonly used on outdoor training walls, required the user to clip in only after confirming both harness buckles were correctly doubled back. Unknown to her, when she tightened the fit that morning, she had rethreaded both her waist and leg loop buckles, but failed to double back the waist strap completely. The tail end sat flat but unsecured, a subtle error that would let the belt slide loose under sudden load. The day's training goal was to complete 2 full clean laps before sunset. Temperatures had dropped slightly, and she texted her coach she'd get one more burn in. There were no other climbers nearby. Earlier that week, park staff had posted a notice warning of small rock debris and loose holds from the freeze-thaw cycle, but the section she chose appeared clean. She clipped her Autobelay, checked the carabiner gate, and adjusted the camera angle. The footage, later reviewed by investigators, began uneventfully. Kelsey climbed efficiently, but the overhang steepened near the 4th fixed draw, where her movement slowed. She shifted her right foot higher, reached for the next hold, and hesitated just slightly before committing. At that moment, her left hand slipped. The fall began as a routine drop, short and easily caught, But as her harness loaded, the waist belt slipped through its buckle while the right leg loop twisted free. The loose threading let both sections release under tension, sending her tumbling backward in free fall. The GoPro view blurred in a flash of rock and sky before cutting hard as she struck the lower wall. Then the floor, seconds later, with a heavy, final thud. When Kelsey didn't return home that night, her parents called park authorities. A search team located her the next morning at the base of the wall, still on the soft red sand where she'd fallen. Her phone and helmet camera were recovered nearby, both intact. Timestamps confirmed the fall occurred less than 2 minutes into her third recorded attempt. Medical reports listed multiple blunt force injuries, consistent with a 45-foot fall. Inspectors replicated the failure in testing and confirmed that visual inspection alone would not have revealed the error without a hands-on check. They also noted that the waist belt had remained intact and clipped to the Autobelay carabiner, consistent with a leg loop slippage event, which allows the user to invert and slip free during a fall. Her parents later allowed segments of the footage to be shown privately during national youth climbing briefings. The Climbing's Youth Committee subsequently issued a technical notice reminding coaches to verify leg loop threading before Autobelay use, referencing the case anonymously. It was August 22, 2015, in the Boogaboos of British Columbia. The weather that morning was still and deceptively clear, the kind of blue that makes distance hard to read, cliffs flatter than they are, two small figures perched high above, finishing what they believed would be the most important climb of their young lives. James Tran, 23, and Owen Bell, 24, were recent geology graduates from the University of Calgary. They had met during a field methods course 3 years earlier, bonding over long nights mapping strata by headlamp and early hikes through scree fields. Both had planned to pursue graduate research, but before settling into that path, they wanted one last project together, an amateur climbing documentary. The film was meant to blend landscape geology with personal narrative, showing how climbers read rock the way scientists read history. Jamie was the planner, neat with his knots and careful with logistics. Owen handled the filming, often improvising shots and teasing Jamie about being the responsible one. The Bugaboos appealed to them for their vertical granite and sparse traffic that season. Both had taken mountaineering courses and had logged several alpine climbs that summer. But this one, a slender spire known locally as the Crescent, was steeper and less protected than routes they'd done before. It was graded only a half step above their usual range, but the approach required a long scramble across exposed ridges where shale and gravel overlay solid granite. That transitional zone, more unstable than it appeared from below, would later define the investigation. They reached the summit shortly before 4 p.m., according to the GoPro timestamp attached to Owen's helmet. Footage recovered later showed the two men standing shoulder to shoulder, helmets off, wind tugging at their jackets. They turned the camera outward, panning across snowfields and distant peaks veiled in shifting light. Jamie's voice mentioned that they'd have to move fast before the clouds thickened. Owen set the camera on a rock ledge to frame their handshake and short hug, an ending scene for the film. By the time they began coiling ropes, thin mist had begun to obscure the view east. At 5:12 p.m., they started down the shale ridge toward their rappel point. The GoPro remained running, clipped to Owen's chest. The ridge narrowed abruptly, forcing them to edge sideways along a slope of fractured rock. Owen moved first, shifting weight carefully, boot soles grinding on unstable fragments. Jamie followed, keeping one hand against the wall. He stepped backward to adjust his stance. A sudden scrape followed, one small rock breaking free. Owen's left foot slid, dislodging a slab the size of a textbook. The video jolted violently as the camera spun toward Jamie lunging forward, reaching out of frame. Then came a sharp crack, a startled yell, and the grinding roar of rock against rock. Both bodies crashed through loose shale, striking ledges in rapid succession. The sound built into a chaotic blur of impacts, bone, stone, and fabric tearing, before ending in a dull, final thud. Rescuers located their tent the next morning after they failed to return by nightfall. A search helicopter spotted disturbed shale and bright rope about 400 feet below the ridge. Analysis of the footage confirmed that neither climber had anchored during the scramble. Both men were recovered that evening and airlifted to Invermere. Their university later received permission from the families to finish the short film using surviving clips. It was shown once during a memorial in the Geology Department auditorium. It was October 9th, 2018, in Calabria, southern Italy. Morning fog still clung to the base of the cliffs when Marco Vitale and his small film crew unpacked their gear for a short promotional shoot for the regional tourism board. Marco, 31, was a professional climber and freelance filmmaker from Naples. He had built a small reputation producing videos for outdoor brands and local travel projects, blending technical climbing with cinematic visuals. His background in geology had made him attentive to rock structure. He often tapped surfaces before committing, listening for hollow tones that betrayed weakness. The climb that day, however, wasn't chosen by him. The tourism board wanted to highlight a less frequented sector to promote rural destinations ahead of the summer season. Centuries of salt exposure and seasonal rain had left the limestone cliffs along Calabria's coast riddled with fractures. Winter storms seeped into these faults, softening the interior layers until the outer crust appeared solid but hollowed beneath. In climbing terms, the roots demanded trust in rock that didn't always deserve it. Marco's plan was to lead the route cleanly, while two friends filmed from ground and mid-face anchors, with a drone providing wide aerial shots. The climb began just after noon. Weather forecasts warned of minor coastal gusts, but nothing severe. The primary risk was the rock itself. Locals had reported a few minor collapses earlier that year after heavy rainfall, but no formal closures were in place. The wall chosen, an overhanging formation known as Punta Bianca, was considered dry enough for filming. Marco had debated postponing after noticing thin white lines of mineral seepage near the upper roof. But deadlines and travel costs pushed the crew to continue. At first, the footage showed a steady ascent. Marco moved methodically, clipping each bolt, chalk dust drifting in thin clouds. At 60 feet, he paused under a bulge where the angle steepened. The main camera captured him brushing off loose grit, examining the next hold before committing. He shifted his weight left, reached for a protruding flake, and began to clip the rope into the next bolt. The creak came faintly, picked up on both ground and drone audio. Witnesses later described it as sounding like wood under strain. In reality, it was a deep fracture line spreading through a weakened slab. A pulse of dust erupted. Then the entire 400-pound section tore free in one violent drop. The rock struck the wall with a concussive crack, ripping out his left side protection and dragging him down in a blur of stone and debris. The drone footage captured only chaos, gray haze, a flash of limbs, and the slab breaking apart as it pounded through the lower ledges before everything went still. When the dust cleared, the B layer was still upright, bleeding from a forehead cut. Realizing what had happened, he immediately called for help on the crew's radio and began shouting across the wall, his voice carrying across the cliffs. Other climbers nearby joined the call, relaying coordinates to the park rescue station. The first rescue team arrived roughly 40 minutes later, confirming there were no vital signs. Local authorities secured the area and reviewed the footage for structural analysis. Geological inspectors identified multiple hidden fissures extending beyond the failed section, likely weakened by prior rainfall. The crag was immediately closed, pending safety review. Weeks later, the video was submitted to the National Mountaineering Council for training use. The tourism board withdrew the promotional project indefinitely. It was January 11th, 2016, on the upper slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. The thin night air bit against exposed skin, and the glow of headlamps stretched in a line toward the crater rim. Before sunrise at Stella Point, one climber's determination would cross into fatal misjudgment. Graham Veheman was 36, a financial analyst from London. He lived by metrics, heart rates, split times, performance reviews. A weekend marathoner, he prided himself on efficiency and toughness, repeating to friends that pain was temporary, but persistence defined him. Climbing Kilimanjaro had been an office dare, a goal born from boasting, but he prepared by logging treadmill miles and occasional hill sprints. His colleagues Priya and Daniel joined partly for camaraderie, partly to measure themselves against him. The Mashame route was marketed as manageable for fit amateurs, but the reality was stark. Barafu Camp, The last staging point at 15,331 feet left most struggling with headaches and shallow sleep. Climbers relied on layering, trekking poles, and guides trained to recognize danger signs. Supplemental oxygen was carried only for emergencies, while a portable hyperbaric chamber was considered best practice. Operators stressed pole, slow progress, to let the body adapt. But Graham saw slowness as weakness. The summit push began at midnight. At Kosovo Camp, 16,076 feet. His speech slurred and his gait faltered. Guide Joseph advised turning back, citing altitude sickness risk. Graham dismissed it, insisting he had endured worse. Priya followed uneasily behind, noticing his sway. The group moved upward. By 18,700 feet, Graham vomited, wiped his mouth, and forced a grin. Then, warnings multiplied. He tried to sit on the trail, claiming he needed 5 minutes. Joseph urged him to stay on his feet. At 18,860 feet, he stumbled, crossing his legs clumsily before collapsing. Priya described his eyes as unfocused, as though looking through her. Joseph placed an oxygen mask over his face and demanded immediate descent. The second guide hurried ahead with a stretcher alert, but conditions required they move Graham by dragging and half-carrying. During the descent, he grew combative. He ripped off his gloves, clawed at his jacket, muttering incoherently. His lips darkened, skin mottled by cold and lack of oxygen. Joseph and the second guide laid him on a foam pad, shielding him with a bivy sack as spindrift gathered. They attempted oxygen and chest compressions when he no longer responded to pain. The radio crackled back with stretcher instructions. The guides alternated compressions and breaths in the snow. By 5:18, after repeated cycles, Joseph called off resuscitation. Graham's body was wrapped for evacuation, his summit dream ending beneath the crater edge. He was carried back to Barafu Camp, then down to Mueka Gate. A brief memorial was held in Moshi, his colleagues present but subdued, before his body was flown home. His London office organized a service, co-workers quietly acknowledging how pride had pushed him past warning signs. The Tanzanian medical examiner confirmed cerebral edema as the cause of death. Park authorities reviewed outfitter protocols, stressing that guide instructions must be final and that oxygen alone was insufficient. They urged operators to provide hyperbaric chambers for summit attempts, warning that ignoring early signs meant consequences far more permanent than a failed climb. It was September 3rd, 2015, on the western breach of Mount Kilimanjaro. Dawn light revealed fractured rock and streaks of thaw across the steep gully below Arrow Glacier as climbers moved cautiously. The day promised clear skies, but carried risks hidden in the mountain's unstable face. Elena Renfield was 28, an ICU nurse from Denver. She worked rotating shifts, balancing exhaustion with long hikes in the Rockies that became her outlet from hospital intensity. Colleagues admired her resilience and her deliberate approach to risk, often noting that her medical training made her more cautious than reckless. For Elena, summiting Kilimanjaro was not about conquest, but about seeking a quieter, more authentic route. She bypassed the crowded Morang and Machame paths, instead committing to the remote Lemosho variation with a western breach finish, a choice her friends said reflected her preference for solitude and challenge. The western breach was known for exposure and rockfall. Unlike the standard summit routes, it demanded helmets, close guide supervision, and early starts to reduce thaw hazard. The terrain comprised steep gullies filled with loose scree and blocks that shifted with temperature changes. That morning, the group left at first light. The night had been unusually warm, softening the frozen rock that normally stayed bonded until midday. A porter mentioned the thaw risk to the head guide, but the decision was to continue, reasoning that speed and helmets would mitigate danger. Elena tightened her chin strap, adjusted her trekking poles, and fell in step behind teammate Mark. The guide spaced the clients out, scanning the ridges above for movement. Crossing the gully was the most exposed section. The walls rose high on both sides, funneling debris if anything broke loose. The group was told to move quickly, but stay pressed against the left wall. Elena followed instructions, steady but tense, glancing up at the ridgeline. Mark, just ahead, later recalled the silence broken only by boots scraping scree. The warning came suddenly, a sharp shout of "rock." The first fragment smashed against the slope, spraying shards across helmets. Elena flinched, crouching low. A second rock, football-sized, struck the brim of her helmet and deflected into her face, cutting deep. Blood spread instantly across her cheek. She dropped to her knees, disoriented. Before she could recover, a larger rock ricocheted from the upper wall and struck her between the shoulders. Witnesses described her hands twitching briefly before she went limp. Guides rushed in, forming a shield with their bodies as smaller stones rattled down. When the slope quieted, they dragged her to a rib of rock shielded from the fall line. A check showed shallow breaths and unresponsive pupils. Her pulse weakened as they stabilized her neck and radioed a ranger post. A stretcher climb-up was impossible in that terrain, so they began a slow, precarious descent. Porters rotated positions, balancing it on shifting scree while others scouted ahead. Partway down, Elena lost pulses entirely. Guides began chest compressions in the thin air, cycling with rescue breaths, while porters stood guard for renewed rockfall. Despite repeated attempts, there was no response. By the time they reached Lava Tower, the effort had stopped. Emergency services were called, but they only declared her dead. Her remains were carried off the mountain by stretcher, then escorted down the Mueca route for eventual repatriation. In Colorado, her funeral was held in a closed casket service, attended by co-workers, family, and friends who remembered her dedication to both patients and the outdoors. Authorities issued a report afterward, reiterating that the western breach should only be attempted when freeze conditions held firm. They re-emphasized helmet mandates, strict timing advisories, and operator accountability in choosing routes. It was August 20th, 2018, on Kilimanjaro's upper slopes. The night began clear and still, but the mountain carried its own volatility. Between Barafu Camp and Stella Point, darkness and sudden weather changes would turn the routine summit corridor into a trap for those unprepared. Keiko Miyazaki, 52, worked as an office manager in Tokyo. Colleagues described her as meticulous, quiet, and disciplined. She trained for the climb through stairwell intervals and weekend hikes near Mount Takao, but she lacked true alpine exposure. This trip was a gift to herself and her adult son, a shared milestone after years of long work weeks. She purchased new gear for the climb, including a down jacket that had never been tested in wind-driven snow. Keiko approached the ascent with her usual thoroughness, but her background was in controlled environments, not in unpredictable extremes. The route from Barafu to the crater rim was straightforward by trekking standards, well-trodden switchbacks across scree slopes leading toward Stella Point at 18,800 feet, but the exposure at that altitude was absolute. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and wind could create whiteouts that erased both trail and bearings. The team left Barafu at midnight, 30 under a clear sky. With Keiko walking beside her son, by 2 a squall arrived. Wind scoured the slope, throwing spindrift into their lamps. Visibility collapsed to a few feet. The assistant guide, Amani, tightened the group into a cluster, counting heads at each halt. Keiko began to struggle. She complained that her right hand felt wooden, fumbling with her headlamp strap. Her son tried to adjust her gloves, but the storm pressed them forward. At 17,300 feet, Keiko drifted a few steps away from the kicked-in trail, her silhouette blurring in the snow flurries. Amani shouted as her figure vanished downslope. They scrambled to her position and found her lying on her side, snow stinging her face. She insisted she was fine, though her words slurred. Her son tried to replace her soaked liner gloves with spares. When Amani helped her to stand, her legs buckled and she collapsed again. Recognizing hypothermia, Amani pulled a bivy sack from his pack and wrapped her. They turned downhill immediately, but the gale cut into their pace. Wind chill made every pause dangerous. 10 minutes later, Keiko began repeating her own name, then trailed into silence. Her son begged to descend faster, but Amani called ahead on the radio, arranging help, and chose to shelter behind a rock rib for protection. He massaged her hands and tried to force warm drink into her mouth, but swallowing reflex faded. Keiko's shivering stopped. Her son later told rangers that her skin felt like ice even through the gloves. When 2 porters arrived an hour later with a stretcher, she was barely conscious, her carotid pulse weak and slowing. They strapped her in and began the descent. Within minutes, she lost responsiveness altogether. Repeated cycles of CPR continued as they moved lower, but her heart did not restart. By the time they reached Kosovo Campi, she was cold and pulseless. A Buddhist service was held in Moshi with the assistance of a local interpreter. Her body was repatriated quietly to Japan, where only a short obituary appeared in local news. Following the incident, authorities and park medics updated summit night briefings. Operators were urged to require proven cold weather gear, enforce glove and hand warmer redundancy, and regroup strictly at each switchback during storms. It was October 7th, 2017, at Barafu High Camp on Kilimanjaro's Machame route. The wind blew across the ridge in steady bursts, flattening tents and filling the air with grit. Climbers huddled in fabric shelters, waiting out the cold before their summit push. In one of those tents, a decision made for convenience would instead trigger disaster. Rahul Sarkar, 24, was a mechanical engineering student from Mumbai. He had always been drawn to tinkering with equipment, testing what others overlooked. Friends joked about his curiosity for fire and combustion. He had once modified a camp stove for a university demonstration. The climb was his first expedition outside India, planned with fellow alumni on a tight budget. His drive was less about mountaineering fame and more about proving resourcefulness. He was confident in improvising solutions, sometimes brushing aside rules he saw as overcautious. Kilimanjaro's high camps were not designed for comfort. Barafu sat at 15,300 feet on exposed scree, its tent platforms crowded with climbers. Open flames inside nylon tents were known hazards. Outfitters emailed warnings beforehand, emphasizing that stoves should only be used in communal cook tents with ventilation. A liquid fuel stove, when primed, could flare uncontrollably before stabilizing. Any spill risked igniting instantly in the thin, dry air. Most climbers accepted the protocol. Rahul saw it as an unnecessary restriction. That evening, after an acclimatization hike toward Kosovo camp, the group returned to Barafu to find space scarce. Winds battered the tents, making it uncomfortable to prepare water outside. Rahul decided to make tea inside his vestibule, insisting it would save time before the summit push. His tentmate, Arvind, protested weakly, but gave in as Rahul laughed about lab safety drills and set the stove on a foam pad. The vestibule was zipped tight against the wind, leaving no airflow. A porter passed by and noticed the faint smell of fuel, but assumed it would be extinguished quickly. Rahul primed the stove. A sudden flare shot upward, licking the vestibule fabric. He jerked back, striking the fuel bottle. Liquid splashed across the nylon floor and ignited. The vestibule became a torch within seconds. Arvind screamed and tried to kick the stove outside, but flames had already climbed the tent wall. From outside, the porter saw the glow intensify and rushed forward with a knife, slashing through the fly. Inside, Rahul's jacket caught fire at the shoulder and chest as the collapsing tent pinned him. Arvind crawled out coughing, skin blistering on his hands. Rangers and porters pulled Rahul free, dousing him with water bottles and shovels of snow. His jacket peeled away in burned strips, exposing deep, charred skin across his chest and neck. Black soot coated his mouth. He wheezed in short, shallow breaths, a sign of airway burns. Guides wrapped wet dressings and opened an oxygen cylinder, but his condition worsened. He was placed on a stretcher for descent toward Millennium Camp. Arvind, shaken and injured, stumbled behind as porters rotated carrying duty. Partway down, Rahul's breathing collapsed into gasps, then stopped altogether. A medic from another group attempted intubation with limited equipment, but could not maintain an airway through the swelling. CPR was performed as the stretcher was lowered in stages, but he did not regain a pulse. At Millennium Camp, the effort was called off. His remains were flown back to India, where his family arranged a closed cremation. Few outside his circle knew the details. Authorities issued immediate safety directives. Stoves were confiscated from client tents for the remainder of the season, with fines imposed for flame use in shelters. It was March 15, 2015, on the Barranco wall of Mount Kilimanjaro. Climbers in staggered lines began the slow ascent, ropes scraping rock. Among them, one man moved faster than most, carrying with him both confidence and an unseen threat that would not release him. Peter Damien, 43, from Cape Town, was known in his circle as a driven ultramarathoner. He thrived on endurance events that punished the body, having completed multi-day desert races where temperatures reached extremes. Colleagues described him as meticulous in training, but dismissive of what he saw as unnecessary caution. For him, climbing Kilimanjaro was not about leisure, but efficiency. He chose the shorter 6-day Machame itinerary, pushing for speed. Sponsors from a regional athletic gear shop supplied his shoes and clothing, counting on him to return with photographs of their brand atop Africa's highest peak. Kilimanjaro's terrain is deceptive, non-technical yet punishing at altitude. The Barranco Wall, a 900-foot rise of basalt ledges and narrow traverses, demands strength and focus. Climbers advance in a slow, deliberate pace, the thin air forcing rest stops. Guides monitor oxygen saturation, heart rate, and hydration, especially after 12,000 feet. That morning, he had woken from a restless night at Barranco camp, coughing with a throat that felt raw. A pulse oximeter reading showed saturation in the low 80s, far below normal sea level values. His guide noted the numbers with concern. Peter brushed it aside, insisting he felt strong, and began the climb first. Others noticed his pace slowing midway. He paused more often, hands on his knees, lips showing a faint bluish hue. When asked to stop, he waved them on, unwilling to fall behind. Near the upper section, where the wall opens into switchbacks leading to Karanga Valley, Peter bent double, coughing hard. Pink froth appeared on his lips, a telltale sign his lungs were failing. His sister called out, and the lead guide, Musa, rushed forward. Peter tried to straighten, pushing for another step, then slumped onto a rock, gasping. Musa fitted bottled oxygen over his face and insisted on immediate descent. Peter attempted to rise but staggered, nearly falling off the narrow ledge until his sister grabbed his pack strap. His breathing grew rapid and wet, and he muttered that his chest felt flooded. They began a supported retreat down the wall, porters taking turns steadying him. Each step drained him further, the oxygen mask barely helping. Peter's skin turned gray, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cool air. He collapsed on the trail, his eyes glassy, head rolling back as he struggled for breath. Porters hurried a stretcher into place, strapping him in while Musa directed the descent toward Karanga Valley. Clouds rolled in, cutting visibility and grounding the helicopter option. The group pressed on, stumbling over rocks as Peter's body weakened. By the time they reached the valley floor, his pulse was faint. Guides tried to clear fluid from his airway, wiping froth that continued to rise. Despite supplemental oxygen and chest compressions, his heart stopped before they could reach Karanga camp. His sister brought home his remains. Weeks later in Cape Town, his running club organized a service. Fellow athletes placed his race bibs on a table beside his photograph, and the club dedicated their annual ultramarathon to him. In Tanzania, park medics issued updated safety sheets warning of accelerated itineraries and fit but fast climbers who often underestimated acclimatization needs. Within months, most expeditions carried pulse oximeters at every stop as standard practice. It was February 26, 2018, on the crater rim of Mount Kilimanjaro. The morning climb had begun under clear skies, but by the time the team reached Stella Point, clouds had gathered, darkening the horizon. What should have been a brief push to the summit ridge was instead shaping into something unstable, with the kind of tension in the air that often precedes disaster. Alvaro Chavez, 34, from Spain, worked as a secondary school science teacher in Madrid. He loved to turn personal adventures into lessons for his students, often using his experiences outdoors to explain weather, geology, and physiology. He was cheerful, fond of jokes, and known for being both curious and stubborn. Friends described him as someone who underestimated danger, preferring to laugh it off rather than slow down. His trip to Kilimanjaro was funded in part by a small outdoor outfitter in Spain that supplied him with trekking gear, hoping he would return with photos to use in their catalog. Kilimanjaro's crater rim is a harsh place for mistakes. The ridge between Stella Point and Uhuru Peak runs narrow and exposed, with no shelter from sudden weather. The air is thin at over 18,000 feet, making judgment slower and reflexes weaker. Hail or rain turns the volcanic gravel slick. Metal equipment, common among trekkers, becomes a hazard when storms build. While guides train clients to recognize these dangers, summit fever often overrides caution, especially so close to the peak. That morning, the group's arrival at Stella Point coincided with cumulus clouds building rapidly. The lead guide, Rahema, urged caution, suggesting a quick photo before turning back if thunder grew nearer. Alvaro, however, was insistent about pressing on. When small hail began to fall, some clients hesitated. The group debated whether to continue along the final ridge. The discussion dragged until a low rumble rolled across the crater. Still, several clients leaned toward pushing on, unwilling to abandon the summit within sight. Rahema pressed them to decide quickly, reminding them of the risks. Alvaro stood with both poles upright, scanning the ridge as if waiting for consensus. The clouds thickened and the hail increased, pelting faces and hands. Despite warnings, momentum carried the group a short distance farther along the trail. Suddenly, a sharp crack of thunder followed almost instantly by a blinding flash struck the rim. The bolt hit directly where Alvaro stood. Witnesses saw his body arch backward before collapsing to the ground, smoke rising from his jacket. The sharp smell of ozone filled the air. His trekking poles clattered to the rocks, glowing briefly with residual heat. Rahema shouted for everyone to drop poles and crouch low, forcing the group to huddle against the lee side of the ridge as hail whipped around them. One client reached Alvaro first and saw a dark burn mark tracing from his neck down his chest, where a thin chain had rested. His breathing was absent, his pupils unresponsive. Rahema and another guide began compressions, alternating with attempts at rescue breathing. Each cycle yielded no change. The sound of thunder continued overhead, with more flashes flickering across the summit plateau. After repeated CPR efforts without a pulse, Rahema ordered the rest of the group to evacuate downslope, while 2 guides remained behind to secure the body once conditions stabilized. Later inspection confirmed entry and exit wounds consistent with a direct lightning strike. His clothing showed fused fabric and melted spots where the charge had traveled. Both poles bore scorch marks at their tips. The evidence left no doubt of the cause. Alvaro's remains were flown home, where a funeral was held with his family and colleagues from the school in attendance. Following the incident, authorities issued a new advisory circulated to all expedition operators. It emphasized dropping all metal objects when thunder is audible, abandoning summit attempts at the first sign of lightning, and avoiding exposed ridges entirely during electrical storms. It was July 12, 2018, in Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona. The sun had already turned the landscape into a white blur by mid-morning, and the canyon floors shimmered like molten metal. That morning, 2 friends from Phoenix walked past danger signs, laughing, carrying less water than one person would need on a mild day. Mark Uri, 27, and Ryan Patel, 28, both worked in sales at a mid-sized software company in Tempe. They had met 2 years earlier at a company retreat and bonded over manly competition. Who could lift more at the gym? Who could handle more spice? Who could go longer without rest? Ryan had recently moved from Seattle and was still adjusting to Arizona's heat, while Mark, who grew up in Mesa, often bragged that you just get used to it. Both men spent hours scrolling through a casual hiking Facebook group where weekend adventurers compared routes and gear setups. The night before the hike, Mark posted in that group announcing their plan to crush a trail in one push, even tagging the post with a sun emoji and a joking caption about hydration being optional. The responses came fast. Some users mocked the idea, while others warned that people faint on that trail every summer from heat stroke. A few begged them to start before sunrise or turn back by 10 a.m. Mark just replied with a laughing emoji. The trail they chose is notorious for its deceptive layout, descending first through shaded rock corridors before opening into a sun-baked corridor with few water stations. Temperatures there can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit by noon, magnified by the canyon's rock walls. Rangers recommend carrying at least 1 gallon of water per person per hour. Mark packed less than a quart in a soft bottle clipped to his backpack. Ryan brought 2 sports drinks and a bag of almonds. At 10:18 a.m., they started from the south rim. Other hikers coming up the trail warned them to turn back. One woman specifically mentioned that the lower section was like an oven. Mark shrugged it off, saying they'd be fine if they paced themselves. Ryan hesitated but followed. As they descended, the air thickened with reflected heat. The thermometer at the 3-mile rest house read 107 degrees Fahrenheit. By then, their shirts were soaked through and their voices had gone quiet. Around noon, they reached a flat stretch near Indian Garden. The few shaded alcoves were already occupied by cautious hikers waiting out the midday peak. Mark, red-faced and breathing heavily, decided they should keep going to beat the clock. Ryan tried to sip water, but found his bottle empty. His head began pounding, consequences of dehydration creeping. They passed another group resting beneath a ledge who warned them again not to proceed, but Mark waved them off. Minutes later, they were alone, trudging across open terrain under full sun. Eyewitnesses coming from the opposite direction first noticed them about 40 minutes later. From a distance, The pair looked like they were resting, one lying motionless near a boulder, the other bent over with hands on knees. As the approaching hikers drew closer, they realized something was wrong. Mark was face down in the dust, skin pale and dry. Ryan was staggering, trying to speak but producing only slurred sounds. When he collapsed again, the hikers dragged him into the narrow shade and called 911 on a satellite phone. Two others tried to shield Mark with a jacket, while another poured the last of their water on his neck and chest. By the time the rescue team arrived by helicopter, Ryan's pulse was faint but present. Mark showed no vital signs. Paramedics confirmed heat stroke and severe dehydration. Ryan was treated with intravenous fluids and transported to Flagstaff Medical Center, where he remained in recovery for 3 days. The National Park Service recorded Mark Ari's death as the 6th heat-related fatality in Grand Canyon that year. Ryan Patel later told investigators he hadn't realized how fast the heat locked in on them. Co-workers said he stopped hiking entirely and left the company within months. It was September 7, 2015, in the Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona. The park's entrance signs warned visitors to keep distance from wildlife. For Arav Mehta, 32, that sign was another photo opportunity. Arav had moved to Las Vegas from Mumbai 4 months earlier to start a financial analyst job for a commercial investment firm. He was ambitious, eager to fit in, and obsessed with documenting his American adventure, all framed to show him thriving abroad. Though intelligent and disciplined at work, he had a habit of trivializing risk. He'd once joked about how in his home country, India, everything's 1,000 times more risky. He wore trail shoes and gym shorts instead of hiking boots that day, carrying only a small hydration pack and a phone charger, ignoring park advice about gear and distance. The Bright Angel Trail was already known for its unpredictable hazards, extreme heat, loose terrain, and frequent encounters with Grand Canyon rattlesnakes. Rangers recommended early starts and constant awareness near shaded switchbacks where snakes cooled themselves. And when they rounded a rocky curve near the 1.5-mile rest house, they heard the dry buzz of a rattle about 15 feet ahead. The snake was coiled at the trail's edge, partly concealed in shadow. One of his co-workers urged caution, suggesting they step around and keep moving. But Arav, grinning, crouched down and said he wanted a close-up for Instagram. The others laughed nervously, assuming he was joking. He moved closer, holding his phone out, steadying his knee on the gravel. The snake's head lifted slightly, its coils tightening. A friend half-jokingly called him crazy. Another said to stop. Arav, trying to show control, leaned a little closer, less than 3 feet away. The strike happened too fast to register. A blur of motion, a dry snap, and then Arav's sudden flinch as the snake recoiled. The fangs had punctured his right calf through the thin fabric of his shorts. For a few seconds, he laughed nervously, insisting it barely got him. But his co-workers panicked, guiding him toward a shaded rock ledge and calling 911 from a patchy service area. One tied a shirt loosely above the bite, another tried to keep him from standing. Within 20 minutes, his leg began to swell noticeably, the skin around the punctures darkening. He complained of burning pain radiating toward his knee and a metallic taste in his mouth. By the 40-minute mark, his speech slurred and he vomited repeatedly. Around an hour after the bite, his pulse grew erratic and he drifted in and out of consciousness. The dispatch operator instructed them to keep him calm until rangers arrived, but the heat and isolation made it difficult. Roughly 75 minutes after the strike, Arav lost the ability to sit upright. His breathing slowed and he collapsed. When park rangers reached the group by helicopter around 12:30 p.m., they confirmed no pulse and began CPR. But the neurotoxic and hemotoxic effects of the Grand Canyon rattlesnake's venom had already caused cardiovascular collapse. Rangers declared Arav Mehta dead at the scene at 12:48 p.m. His co-workers were questioned by investigators. The official report classified the incident as preventable wildlife provocation. Rangers called it one of the year's most needless deaths. Within a week, the story barely circulated beyond local outlets. His employer released a short condolence note. Co-workers deleted the photos they'd taken that morning. The trail reopened the next day. It was March 18, 2017, when the Canyonair hung at Grandview Point in Grand Canyon National Park. The view stretched endlessly, quiet and unbroken. It was the kind of deceptive calm that made danger feel distant, and that illusion was exactly what drew Elliot Kaufer too far. Elliot, 29, lived in Flagstaff and worked as a delivery driver for a local equipment supplier. He spent weekends hiking and posting photos of himself at obscure overlooks, often tagging brands for gear sponsorships that never came. His friends described him as confident, sometimes overly so, and very impatient. He had been hiking for years, but rarely trained seriously or learned safety protocols. A week earlier, over beers at a co-worker's barbecue, Elliot had talked about his next hike. He said the marked switchbacks of Bright Angel and South Kaibab were for tourists, that real hikers cut their own lines if they knew where to look. Grandview Point, he said, had an old miner's route dropping steeply toward Horseshoe Mesa, a trail once used during the copper mining era, but now only partly maintained. The area was known among rangers for friable shale, loose footing, and deceptive drop-offs masked by desert scrub. But Elliot saw that as part of the appeal. That morning, he parked his silver Subaru Outback in the visitor lot before sunrise and checked a topographic app on his phone. His plan was likely to descend the ridge directly beneath the viewpoint, skipping the established Grandview Trail that wound east toward Horseshoe Mesa. There were clear warning signs advising against unmarked descent, but he probably dismissed them as exaggerated. A ranger later recalled seeing him glance at the signboard briefly before continuing. When Elliot didn't show up for work the next day, a co-worker reported him missing. Rangers found his car still parked at Grandview Point, untouched, which prompted a full search along unofficial paths below the rim. By mid-morning, the sun was higher, and the shale surface had loosened. Helicopter crews spotted fresh slide marks and scattered gear along an unmarked slope south of the viewpoint. From there, investigators began reconstructing what must have happened. Based on those findings, they determined Elliot likely began descending diagonally down the ridge. Around one section, search teams found clear scuff marks and a broken trekking pole. The positioning suggested he tried to steady himself, but lost traction on the shale, which sheared away under his weight. His backpack was discovered wedged in rock about halfway down, a sign he had tumbled, caught briefly, and then continued falling. The slope below was a series of angled ledges, ending in a vertical exposure roughly 180 feet deep. Evidence from impact patterns and debris allowed rescuers to piece together the sequence: a long slide, several impacts, and a final fall into the basin. The autopsy confirmed multiple blunt force injuries to the head, chest, and lower extremities, consistent with repeated impact and rotation during descent. His climbing rope remained coiled and secured to the pack straps, unused. There were no signs of attempted self-arrest, meaning the fall was fast and disorienting. One of his trail shoes had been torn off by the third ledge. Search and rescue teams recovered the body the following day. Loose scree and unstable slopes required a short-haul helicopter extraction rather than a ground recovery. The coroner declared the death accidental, caused by blunt force trauma. Among rescuers, the case was discussed as an example of how quickly simple overconfidence could turn fatal, but the public response was minimal. Afterward, hiking forums briefly debated whether the route he attempted even qualified as a shortcut or just an off-trail scramble. It was June 25th, 2016, a dry, hot afternoon along the Colorado River deep within Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona, where the canyon's limestone walls trapped heat and echo. The water moved deceptively fast, glassy under the sun, its true depth masked by sediment churn. A narrow rock ledge jutted out above a bend in the river, steep, high, and worn smooth by years of flooding. Liam Baloney, 23, was a business student at the University of Arizona. He spent weekends chasing adrenaline and photos. His social media account was filled with cliff dives, rooftop selfies, and hiking shots captioned with slogans about living loud. He wasn't a professional athlete, but he wanted the image of one. He and his friends followed accounts that glorified risk, and each new trip was an unspoken competition for who could post something more extreme. The Grand Canyon was new territory for the group. They'd driven up from Tucson to celebrate finishing summer classes, camping near the South Rim before hiking down along a guided trail used by rafters near a bend of the Colorado River. The ledge they found sat about 30 feet above the water, reachable by a short scramble along a side outcrop. Conditions were far from ideal. Late spring runoff and dam releases from Glen Canyon had raised the Colorado's level, creating stronger currents and obscuring boulders beneath the bend. They started with jokes, daring each other to go first. Liam volunteered immediately. He'd done similar jumps at Lake Powell and wanted the best video for their page. One friend prepared to record from the side while the others stood on the ledge behind him. The plan was simple: sprint, leap, and surface downstream. The problem was that the ledge didn't project far enough to clear the cliff's lower angle, and the landing zone, agitated by the current, was deceptively narrow. From above, the surface appeared still, hiding partially submerged rock shelves common to that stretch of river. Friends later told investigators that Liam paced backward several steps, shook his hands once, and sprinted forward. His shoes scuffed the edge just before takeoff. From their vantage point, it looked like a solid jump, until he twisted slightly mid-air, likely from uneven footing. His body turned off axis, hitting the water diagonally rather than cleanly. The sound was sharp, a thud masked by the splash. For a moment, the group waited, expecting him to surface with a grin. Then a small patch of red appeared in the downstream current. Two of his friends scrambled down the slope, shouting, scanning the water, but the current was too strong. The others ran to higher ground, trying to spot movement. They never saw him resurface. The group called 911 within minutes, but cell reception was weak, forcing one to climb until the signal returned. Dispatch contacted park rangers stationed at Phantom Ranch, who coordinated a river rescue unit already operating nearby. It took nearly an hour for a National Park Service boat to reach the site. Divers located Liam's body several hours later, wedged among submerged rocks roughly 20 yards downstream. His head and chest bore fractures consistent with striking stone beneath shallow water. The autopsy confirmed massive blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Officials determined he had likely been knocked unconscious instantly upon impact. The Park Service issued a short statement reminding visitors that cliff jumping anywhere within Grand Canyon National Park is prohibited. The body was airlifted out the next morning after recovery documentation was completed. Liam's university arranged quiet counseling sessions for the witnesses. No formal memorial was held. It was May 14th, 2016, a clear and windless morning along the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The air was cool enough to invite risk, and the visibility stretched for miles across the layered cliffs. Few people were on the trail that early. Nothing in the scene suggested danger, until someone decided to reach past the edge. Jason Brownsmith, 27, was an aspiring tech vlogger from Phoenix. He worked part-time at a local electronics retailer, filming reviews of gadgets and drones in his spare hours. Most of his uploads drew a few hundred views, but he treated each one like it might go viral. His online persona leaned on confidence he didn't always have in person. He was careful about his equipment, but reckless about context, often ignoring park rules for the sake of a better shot. The Grand Canyon, with its vast backdrop and vertical drop, offered what he called limitless framing potential. He brought 2 drones that morning, an older mid-range model for practice, and a newer one he'd spent months saving for, hoping to capture smoother aerial footage. The terrain near the south rim is deceptive. Hard-packed dust crusted over brittle sandstone, which can crumble without warning. Drone operators are warned not to fly near cliff edges because the rotor's air pressure can dislodge loose material. Jason knew this, but considered himself skilled enough to handle it. His followers expected smooth tracking shots and bold camera angles, and he wanted to deliver something professional-looking. He began the flight shortly after 8 a.m., guiding the drone over the edge for a sweeping canyon view. The footage showed calm, slow pans, until the drone clipped a rock outcrop on the far wall. One rotor broke, sending it spinning down before catching on a narrow ledge about 6 feet below the rim. His frustration likely turned into determination. The drone had cost nearly $1,000, and he wasn't going to lose it. A smarter choice would have been to notify rangers, but he saw the ledge as reachable. The drone, still recording and transmitting to his controller, continued to capture everything. Jason kneeling at the rim, setting down his gear, and leaning over to plan his retrieval. The sandstone edge sloped slightly downward, dusted with fine grit that made it slippery. Jason tested his footing once, then lowered himself over the rim, gripping a small rock lip with one hand and bracing his left shoe against the wall. From the drone's fixed perspective on the ledge, the camera caught him lowering carefully out of view, a shaky, angled image of his arm stretching toward the frame. The drone's camera, still recording, caught the subtle crumble of sand under his weight. He reached with his free hand, stretching for the drone, but his center of balance shifted back. For an instant, he tried to pull forward again, boots scraping for traction, but the surface gave way entirely. The recording continued without interruption, showing his sudden disappearance from frame, followed by the violent jolt of the camera as his hand struck it mid-fall. The image spun skyward, capturing flashes of sky and cliff, then settled at an odd tilt. His camera bag slid after him, hitting the cliff twice before tumbling out of frame. Hikers about a quarter-mile east reported hearing a short yell followed by 2 impacts. Park rangers responded within the hour after a visitor alerted them to an unattended tripod. They located Jason's body roughly 250 feet down, lodged against a small shelf of rock. Rescuers noted that his harness strap was still clipped to his backpack, suggesting he had been using it to anchor his gear rather than himself. His injuries indicated an immediate fatal fall. The ranger report classified the death as accidental and preventable. Drone operation near cliff edges remained prohibited, and park staff later installed additional warning posts near the overlook area where the incident occurred. Jason's parents later donated his remaining equipment to a Phoenix makerspace. It was November 3rd, 2015. A calm afternoon along the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The clouds were thin and white, the air mild after 2 days of rain. Visitors moved slowly along the overlook, pausing for pictures in the pale sunlight. The ground was slick in places, the earth still damp and soft from runoff. Karen Lee, 25, was visiting from San Diego with a few college friends. She worked in digital marketing for a travel accessories company and was known among her group for planning photogenic trips. She had a streak of impulsiveness, especially when it came to photos. Her friends often joked that she'd do anything for the shot. That morning, she had chosen a bright yellow windbreaker for contrast against the red canyon backdrop. The group carried small tripods, phones, and a compact camera. They walked beyond the main paved lookout toward a narrow dirt path where a few scattered rocks formed a natural platform. The soil there was deceptive, hard on top but unstable underneath, weakened by the rain. Rangers often warned about it, but the signs were posted farther back near the main railings, not at the informal photo spots. It was an area where tourists took unnecessary risks, stepping too close for pictures that blurred the line between bravery and carelessness. The idea was simple: take synchronized jump shots with the canyon behind them. Karen insisted on timing the countdown, wanting the perfect frame midair. The first few attempts were safe, each person jumping back from the edge, laughing when the camera missed. Then Karen wanted one of herself alone, framed with the canyon below. Her friends hesitated, warning that the ground still looked damp, but she waved them off. She adjusted her stance closer to the rim, set the self-timer, and stepped back to jump again. A bystander filming the landscape caught the sequence in the corner of his video. Karen bent her knees and jumped, but her landing was a fraction too far forward. Her boots struck a thin, overhanging ledge that immediately fractured. The rock crumbled in chunks, and her weight shifted with it. For a second, she tried to steady herself, arms flailing, but the ground disappeared beneath her. She dropped straight down, hitting the side once before sliding into a brush-filled chute roughly 50 feet below. The sound of her friends screaming carried through the canyon air. One scrambled toward the edge but stopped when the remaining soil started to break under his shoes. Another ran back toward the trail for help. A nearby visitor used his cell phone to call 911, and park dispatch alerted the closest ranger patrol. Rangers arrived within minutes, guided by the witnesses shouting. Rescuers rappelled down the chute to reach her. The terrain was steep and unstable, forcing them to dig footholds into wet sandstone. Karen was found lodged against a patch of low brush. She had sustained multiple fractures and severe blunt trauma consistent with the 50-foot fall. Medics attempted resuscitation briefly, but confirmed she had died at the scene from internal injuries before extraction. Footage from the bystander's camera later surfaced for a short period online. Within hours, comment sections filled with strangers calling her the influencer who fell for a picture. Some fabricated details, claiming she'd been live streaming, though she hadn't been. The video was quietly removed after park investigators requested its deletion to protect the family's privacy. It lasted 2 days before her family requested it to be taken down. The friends who had been with her deleted their accounts and avoided interviews. It was May 23, 2015, when 34-year-old Calvin Rhodes decided to test his new hammock setup at a remote pine forest campground in northern Minnesota. Calvin worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized engineering firm and had a reputation for being methodical yet sometimes impatient with outdoor gear. His camping companions, Marcus Lee and Tasha Nguyen, had arrived earlier that afternoon. Marcus, a 33-year-old auto technician known for his practical approach, immediately noticed the campsite's concerning features. Dead pine trees surrounded their spot, victims of a recent bark beetle infestation. The standing snags displayed obvious decay, hollowed bases, bracket fungi, and peeling bark. Tasha, a 31-year-old office coordinator who always packed safety equipment, had brought a weather radio crackling with wind warnings. Her meticulous nature led her to point out debris scattered around dead tree bases, clear evidence of recent limb failures. Despite these warning signs, Calvin was eager to try his hammock between a live pine and a large dead snag. The deceased tree showed significant decay at its base, with visible rot and a hollow cavity extending several feet up the trunk. Marcus suggested relocating to healthier trees, but Calvin was already threading his suspension system through the anchor points. As afternoon progressed, wind gusts picked up strength. The forest filled with ominous sounds of creaking wood and falling twigs. The compromised snag swayed with each gust, movement becoming more pronounced as wind intensified. Calvin had rigged a bright blue tarp over his hammock, securing it with multiple guy lines staked near exposed roots. When a particularly strong gust hit, Calvin stepped directly under the ridgeline to retention his tarp. This placed him squarely within the fall zone of the deteriorating snag. The wind continued building, and suddenly, a large dead branch broke free, crashing down and collapsing one corner of the tarp shelter. The falling limb created a tangle of rope and fabric that restricted Calvin's movement options. As he tried navigating around the guy lines, the main trunk reached its breaking point. The tree sheared near its rotted base, and the upper section began its deadly descent toward the hammock area. Calvin attempted to step sideways to safety, but his right foot became entangled in a taut guy line. The massive trunk struck him across his upper torso and shoulder area, driving him down against the compacted forest floor and buried root system. The impact caused multiple rib fractures, creating a flail chest condition, along with severe internal lung injuries. His left clavicle snapped from the crushing force, and when his head struck the ground, it resulted in significant skull trauma. Marcus and Tasha immediately rushed to help, carefully removing smaller branches to access Calvin's airway. They could see he was struggling to breathe, with his chest moving abnormally. Despite their CPR attempts, the combination of internal bleeding and chest wall instability made effective resuscitation impossible. Tasha climbed to higher ground, where she managed to get intermittent cell phone signal. Emergency responders eventually reached the remote site via a narrow dirt access road, but Calvin had already succumbed to his injuries. Investigation revealed the snag had been compromised for months, with advanced rot throughout its root system. Officials immediately flagged multiple hazardous trees and temporarily closed the area. This tragic incident serves as a stark reminder that dead trees pose serious risks to campers, especially during windy conditions. It was August 14, 2017, when 29-year-old Jade Emerson decided to explore a narrow slot canyon on a high desert plateau in southern Utah. Jade worked as a freelance graphic designer with a passion for adventure photography that led her to seek dramatic landscapes in remote locations. Her camping partner, Lila Moreno, chose to stay at base camp to organize equipment. Lila, a 28-year-old part-time photographer and retail associate, was detail-oriented and optimistic. She had noticed debris lines and driftwood lodged several feet up canyon walls when they arrived, clear indicators of past flooding. The morning sky remained mostly clear locally, but weather advisories mentioned thunderstorms developing over upstream headwaters. Jade planned a solo hike through a scenic section featuring sculpted sandstone, natural chokestones, and narrow passages dropping to chest height. She wore approach shoes and carried a day pack with camera equipment, water, and a windbreaker. No rope or technical gear was brought since the route was considered straightforward. The entry point showed frequent visitor use, with polished sandstone and recent sediment deposits along the wash bottom. Before departing, Lila reminded Jade to turn around if water levels rose or thunder became audible. They agreed on a rendezvous before dusk. As Jade progressed deeper into the narrow section, temperature dropped slightly. A cool breeze funneled through the confined space, carrying a damp, earthy odor that intensified with each step. Within minutes, thin rivulets appeared around her ankles, and flow clarity deteriorated as silt and foam swirled between her steps. Turbidity increased rapidly, and a low, growing roar approached from upstream. Trickles transformed into knee-deep surge in less than a minute. Floating debris, including branches, leaves, and grit, struck her shins, making it difficult to maintain footing on slickened sandstone. Jade attempted to climb onto a minor ledge to escape rising water, but algae-covered rock defeated her attempts to gain purchase above the main channel. Her approach shoes could not grip wet, polished stone effectively enough to lift her from the flow. The first major wave arrived, carrying a substantial log that briefly wedged at a chokestone before breaking free and striking Jade in the hip. The impact rotated her body and forced her into the main flow path where current was strongest. Hydraulic pressure pinned her torso against a narrow constriction. As she pressed against sandstone, abrasions and contusions formed along her elbows, knees, and hips from grinding contact with rough rock surfaces. A second, larger surge rose above shoulder level, and she began inhaling water as flow intermittently submerged her face. She lost the ability to maintain an effective airway while pinned by relentless hydraulic forces. Her pack strap snagged on a small protrusion, momentarily holding her at torso level. However, another powerful pulse rotated her downward, fully submerging her face and upper chest beneath the muddy torrent. The mechanism of death was drowning due to entrapment in the canyon constriction during flash flood, with contributory blunt trauma from debris impact and sustained wall contact. Back at base camp, Lila reported Jade overdue when she failed to return by the agreed time. Rangers and volunteer search teams were notified and staged downstream as floodwaters receded. As water levels dropped, searchers located camera equipment fragments and pack pieces lodged in debris piles. All footprints in the approach area had been erased by silt-laden floodwater. Jade's body was recovered downstream, where it became trapped against a boulder sieve formation. Visible injuries included extensive abrasions and bruising consistent with debris impact and prolonged canyon wall contact during the flood event. It was April 9, 2016, when 41-year-old Theo Carpenter decided to brave an unexpected cold snap during a spring camping trip at a lakeside campground in northern Wisconsin. Theo worked as a warehouse supervisor and was known for being practical and resourceful, though sometimes overly confident in handling challenging situations with improvised solutions. His camping neighbor, Naomi Price, had set up nearby with her younger brother. Naomi, a 39-year-old home health aide, was naturally conscientious and resourceful, always prepared with extra supplies. She noticed Theo struggling with his gear setup as temperatures dropped below the forecasted range. The campground had recently reopened for the season, and Theo planned this trip for early season fishing. Snow patches remained under dense conifers, and overnight temperatures were forecast to plummet into the low 20s, far colder than his lightweight sleeping system could handle. As evening approached and temperature continued dropping, Theo made a fateful decision to supplement his inadequate insulation. He positioned a small charcoal grill just inside his tent vestibule, reasoning that radiant heat from glowing coals would take the edge off the bitter cold without creating significant fire hazard. A warning placard on the campground bulletin board mentioned carbon monoxide dangers from combustion devices in enclosed spaces, but Theo hadn't read the safety information thoroughly. Wind conditions were remarkably calm, eliminating natural ventilation that might have diluted dangerous gases. Concerned about heat loss, Theo zipped all tent vents completely closed and arranged his cot in a low position. With an active combustion source and sealed ventilation, conditions were perfect for hazardous carbon monoxide buildup throughout the tent's air volume. Neighboring campers, including Naomi, noticed faint smoke odor drifting from Theo's area, but the smell wasn't strong enough to raise alarm. Theo arranged extra blankets and kept the vestibule door mostly closed to prevent cold drafts. As charcoal continued slow combustion throughout the night, it produced carbon monoxide an odorless gas that mixes readily with air and accumulates in poorly ventilated spaces. With vents sealed, concentration of this deadly gas rose steadily, while effective oxygen availability dropped to dangerous levels. Increasing carbon monoxide levels caused Theo's carboxyhemoglobin levels to rise, severely impairing his blood's oxygen delivery to vital organs. His breathing gradually became shallow as hypoxia deepened, but he remained unconscious without attempting to reposition or open ventilation. Glowing coals continued producing carbon monoxide throughout the cold night. Calm atmospheric conditions and the closed vestibule further limited air exchange that might have diluted lethal gas concentration. By early morning, carbon monoxide had reached fatal concentrations. Theo's circulation and respiration ceased without signs of struggle or gear displacement, indicating he likely lost consciousness before realizing the danger. The next morning, Naomi approached to offer hot coffee and check on her neighbor after the brutally cold night. Receiving no response, she alerted a maintenance worker making early rounds. The worker unzipped the vestibule and immediately detected the inactive grill and Theo's unresponsive form. Emergency responders moved Theo to open air and initiated resuscitation, but findings were consistent with prolonged carbon monoxide exposure and no sustained pulse was obtained. Theo was pronounced deceased on scene. Investigators measured hazardous residual carbon monoxide levels in the tent and noted sealed vents and combustion source as primary factors. Following this incident, authorities reinforced prohibitions on heaters and grills in tents regardless of temperature. Additional warning signage with larger icons was installed at water pumps and trailheads throughout the facility. It was October 2nd, 2018, when 52-year-old Marilyn Cooper decided to capture the perfect seascape sketch from a wind-exposed coastal Bluff campsite along the rugged Oregon shoreline. Marilyn worked as a technical illustrator and had developed a passion for plein air sketching that drew her to dramatic coastal locations. Her longtime friend Owen Hart had accompanied her on this trip. Owen, a 55-year-old bookstore clerk known for his steady demeanor, had been Marilyn's hiking partner for over a decade. He possessed a cautious personality that often balanced Marilyn's more adventurous tendencies when finding the perfect vantage point for her artistic work. Their campsite sat approximately 70 feet above wave-cut rock platforms extending into the Pacific Ocean. The bluff edges showed clear signs of ongoing erosion from recent storms, with visible fissures and cracks running parallel to the cliff face. A wooden barrier had been installed near the most eroded segment with caution signage. The purpose of their weekend trip was taking advantage of dramatic autumn light for Marilyn's seascape studies. She brought lightweight sketching supplies and a compact camera. Informal footpaths skirted dangerously close to the bluff edge, offering unobstructed views irresistible to artists. As afternoon progressed, wind conditions intensified significantly. Strong gusts pushed loose sand and grit over the bluff lip. Owen noted evening high tide would reduce accessible rock platforms below, making rescue operations more complicated. Despite Owen's recommendation to stay behind the established barrier, Marilyn was drawn to a grassy pad near a hairline crack in the bluff edge. This position offered an unobstructed coastline view for her planned sunset sketch. Wind continued building, and Owen noticed the hairline crack near Marilyn's position seemed to widen with each powerful gust. He suggested she move to a more stable location, but Marilyn was focused on capturing changing light conditions. As Marilyn adjusted her position for a better angle, she placed her forward foot near the hairline crack Owen had been monitoring. Constant wind erosion and wave action had undermined this section's structural integrity more than was visible. Subtle subsidence occurred beneath her foot as the lip began shearing along the existing fracture plane. The cliff edge section that appeared stable suddenly gave way, removing her primary support and creating an immediate vertical drop. Marilyn fell approximately 70 feet, initially striking a sloped cliff section that redirected her trajectory toward the boulder-studded platform. The first impact produced severe fractures to her lower limbs and pelvis, causing her to roll toward a second impact point. Her secondary contact occurred when she struck her upper torso and head against a large, protruding rock formation. The audible impact was clearly heard by Owen from the cliff top, and he immediately recognized the situation's severity. Marilyn came to rest near a tidal channel where waves were washing over the platform as tide continued rising. Injuries from the high fall included severe blunt head trauma, multiple rib fractures with probable lung laceration, and significant internal hemorrhage. Owen immediately signaled other campers and directed one to contact emergency services. providing approximate cliff height and describing challenging conditions rescue personnel would face due to rising tide. Emergency responders coordinated technical rope rescue due to cliff height and dangerous tidal conditions. Initial approach was delayed to ensure rescuer safety as waves continued washing over the platform. When medical personnel reached the platform, they assessed Marilyn and determined her injuries were consistent with fatal trauma from the high fall. Officials documented cliff edge erosion patterns and fresh fracture lines adjacent to the collapse site. The hazardous area was cordoned off with additional signage installed. It was September 19, 2015, when 37-year-old Reed Donovan decided to embark on a solo weekend photography and birdwatching expedition in a remote backcountry basin in northern Montana. Reed worked as a quality control inspector for a mid-sized manufacturing company and was known for his methodical approach to work and growing passion for wildlife photography. Earlier that day, Sarah Patel had passed through the area while conducting volunteer trail steward duties. Sarah, a 32-year-old part-time barista at a neighborhood coffee shop, was known for her patient and methodical personality. She encountered Reed setting up his campsite in a well-traveled wildlife corridor. The location Reed chose showed clear signs of recent large animal activity, including overturned logs, scattered scat, and well-worn game trails converging near a seasonal water source. The area was particularly attractive to wildlife due to abundant berry patches reaching peak ripeness. Reed positioned his cook area and tent in close proximity, problematic when food odors are involved. His cookware retained faint odors from previous trips, and he left a pot with food remnants under a nearby tree rather than properly cleaning it. Reed stored his remaining snacks in a soft-sided bag inside his tent vestibule rather than using a bear-resistant canister. During his afternoon photography session, he observed fresh tracks near a berry thicket that appeared to be from a medium-sized bear. Despite this clear indication of recent bear activity, he did not adjust his food storage practices. After darkness fell, rustling and huffing sounds began occurring near Reed's cook site. The vestibule wall flexed inward as an animal investigated the stored food bag, drawn by residual odors. A bear entered the camp zone, attracted by unsecured food items and lingering cooking scents. The animal was already in close quarters when Reed became aware of its presence through sounds and movement. Reed exited his tent and confronted the situation directly. He began shouting loudly while waving a flashlight to discourage the animal, moving laterally to position himself between the bear and the forest edge. The bear, having been rewarded by food sense and finding itself in a confined space, made a short bluff charge that escalated into direct contact when the distance closed to just a few yards. During his attempt to back away, Reed stumbled over a low fallen log and fell onto his side, losing his grip on the flashlight. The bear made forceful contact with Reed's upper body, delivering powerful swipes that caused deep lacerations to his arm and crushing injuries to his chest. Reed attempted to crawl toward denser brush cover, but the bear made additional contact before retreating toward the cook area and moving off into the surrounding forest. The combination of severe lacerations and crushing chest trauma resulted in significant internal bleeding that progressed rapidly. Reed's breathing became increasingly shallow as hemorrhagic shock developed, and he remained near the fallen log, partially concealed by low brush vegetation. The mechanism of death was hemorrhagic shock and traumatic chest injury from bear contact, with secondary airway compromise due to his body position. Early the following morning, Sarah returned during her regular patrol duties. She immediately observed disturbed soil, drag marks, and scattered camping gear, indicating a serious incident had occurred. Sarah alerted authorities, and responders followed obvious sign from the cook site to the brush where Reed was located unresponsive. His injuries were incompatible with survival. Wildlife officers documented unsecured food items, tent vestibule damage consistent with animal investigation, and tracks leading to and from the campsite. Area managers issued an advisory requiring proper food storage and implemented temporary closure of nearby campsites to reduce bear habituation risk. It was June 17, 2018, when 26-year-old Paula Jennings decided to join a group river crossing to reach a scenic midstream island for photographs at a riverside campground in the Pacific Northwest. Paula worked as a marketing coordinator for a regional nonprofit and was known for being adventurous and spontaneous, sometimes making decisions without fully considering potential risks. The group outing had been organized by Dylan Brooks, a 27-year-old delivery driver known for his easygoing personality. Also present was Mei Chen, a 25-year-old graduate research assistant in environmental science who possessed an attentive and risk-aware personality. Recent rainfall had significantly elevated the river's flow levels, and the water appeared turbid with visible standing waves and submerged obstacles. Most participants wore sandals that provided minimal ankle support. A ranger information board mentioned dangers of cold water shock and foot entrapment hazard. The group briefly discussed the warnings and agreed to stay together during the crossing. Mei Chen pointed out the fast-moving mid-channel current and suggested selecting a crossing route that would minimize exposure to the deepest sections. However, Paula chose a line slightly downstream of the main group's path, stepping from a stable cobble bar into the opaque, fast-moving water. The riverbed's surface was highly irregular, composed of loose stones that shifted unpredictably under body weight and water pressure. As Paula stepped off a submerged rock, her right foot became wedged between two larger stones positioned in a narrow cleft beneath the surface. The powerful current immediately pushed her forward, causing her knee to bend as she dropped into a partial kneeling position that submerged her torso intermittently. Her attempts to pull her foot upward were unsuccessful due to hydraulic pressure created by the flowing water, which forced her leg deeper into the crevice between rocks, creating an increasingly tight trap. Dylan and May quickly moved to her position, forming a human chain to provide stability and leverage. However, their combined efforts could not generate enough force to counter the relentless current pressure. Paula's head began dipping repeatedly below the waterline as small waves passed over her position. She started aspirating river water and coughing violently, which compromised her ability to maintain an effective airway. The group attempted to rotate Paula's body to change the angle of her trapped foot, but the strong current knocked them off balance. A rope was thrown from shore by other campers, but without a proper harness, it provided limited leverage and risked pulling Paula sideways into deeper water. Cold water temperature began impairing Paula's muscle function and coordination. Her ability to hold her breath became increasingly compromised as hypothermia set in. After several cycles of submersion, Paula's effective breathing ceased entirely. The combination of cold water, physical exhaustion, and repeated aspiration had overwhelmed her body's ability to maintain basic life functions. The mechanism of death was drowning secondary to foot entrapment, with contributory factors including hypothermia and blunt trauma to her leg. Emergency responders arrived equipped with specialized throw bags and pry tools. They established secure positions upstream and downstream from Paula's location to reduce hydraulic force. Using a systematic lever technique, rescuers separated the rocks enough to free Paula's foot. She was immediately moved to shallow water, where resuscitation protocols could be implemented. Despite following standard drowning resuscitation procedures, no sustained pulse could be obtained, and Paula was pronounced deceased at the scene. Officials documented the elevated flow conditions, lack of protective footwear, and Paula's downstream angled crossing attempt as key contributing factors. Signage was updated to include diagrams illustrating foot entrapment mechanisms. It was May 22, 2015, high on the slopes of Mount Everest. The sky was clear, but the air thin. The summit ridges whipped by winds invisible from below. Climbers moved slowly in single file, bundled against the cold, but each step carried hidden danger. Elena Petrova was 34, a schoolteacher from Moscow. Known among her colleagues as quiet and disciplined, she spent most of her free time training. She ran long distances through city parks and practiced on indoor climbing walls, determined to build the strength for an expedition few in her circle thought possible. Though cautious by nature, she saw Everest as a test of endurance and perseverance. The trip was partly funded by a small cultural foundation that encouraged Russian educators to pursue extraordinary goals, and she saw her climb as a way to inspire her students. Climbing Everest relied on meticulous planning. Oxygen cylinders and regulators allowed climbers to function in the death zone, where air was too thin to sustain life for long. Sherpa guides, the high-altitude workers native to the Everest region, carried spares, but the margin for error was slim. Regulators froze, valves jammed, and bottles occasionally ran dry earlier than expected. Above 28,000 feet, even a short interruption in flow could trigger rapid decline. Elena knew the risks, but trusted the systems in place and the experience of her guides. The push for the summit began in darkness. Headlamps dotted the ridge as teams moved slowly upward. Elena had reached the south summit by late morning, only a few hundred feet below the top. The altitude was punishing, each breath shallow despite the hiss of her regulator. Other climbers later testified she appeared strong but moved with noticeable strain. The winds gusted more violently than forecast, forcing several expeditions to turn back. Her team pressed on, but conditions made every pause more dangerous. Near the south summit, Elena slowed sharply. Witnesses recalled her stumbling, her movements jerky and uneven. Her regulator sputtered, the flow breaking in short bursts, and she tore at her mask in panic. She dropped to one knee, gasping violently, her body sagging as if drained in seconds. Guides nearby rushed to her side, signaling for an oxygen swap. In the thin air, her lips darkened almost immediately, her gloved hands clawing weakly at the snow as she tried to stay upright. A Sherpa clipped in a new cylinder and adjusted the valve, but she did not recover. She slumped forward, twitching briefly before going still. The fresh regulator hissed steadily, but her chest no longer rose. Climbers in line behind waited in silence, pinned by the narrow ridge. Rescue efforts lasted several minutes. Guides tried shaking her shoulders, lifting her upright, and forcing the mask into place, but she gave no sign of response. The cold wind swept spindrift across her form as climbers reluctantly moved past. The narrow terrain made recovery impossible, and her body remained on the route, wrapped in snow. On Everest, bodies are often left where climbers fall. The cost and danger of retrieval too great above 8,000 meters. Elena's body remained on the route, wrapped in snow by the winds. In Moscow, her school assembly turned into an emotional tribute, students reading letters she had written from Nepal. Her climbing club, in contrast, spoke bluntly about faulty regulators and urged members to check gear more rigorously. Nepalese officials filed her death with no public remark. It was April 27, 2016, in the Khumbu Icefall on the south side of Mount Everest. Dozens of climbers threaded their way across ladders and ropes. Everything looked steady, but the Icefall's reputation as the most dangerous section of the mountain lingered in every footstep. Priya Sharma was 29 years old, a finance analyst from New Delhi. She had discovered climbing only 5 years earlier through weekend treks in Himachal Pradesh, quickly building a reputation among her friends for her determination. Reserved at work but confident in the mountains, she saved aggressively, channeling much of her earnings into guided expeditions. By 2016, she had summited smaller Himalayan peaks such as Stok Kangri and Island Peak, gradually preparing herself for Everest. Her decision was not impulsive. It was the culmination of years of planning and sacrifice. She was an amateur, but disciplined. She trained in endurance running, spent evenings on climbing walls, and joined Indian mountaineering groups to gain credibility. Though she had no major sponsors, she received equipment discounts from a Delhi outdoor gear retailer in exchange for photos. She told colleagues Everest would be her milestone before turning 30. The risk was real, but she convinced herself that preparation, guides, and discipline would bridge the gap between experience and the mountain's demands. The Khumbu Icefall demanded precise movement. Climbers navigated aluminum ladders tied across deep crevasses, secured by ropes anchored into shifting ice. Each step was deliberate, crampon points catching the thin metal rungs. Safety required double clips to the rope, but even then, sudden shifts could overwhelm the system. Sherpas moved swiftly here, but for less seasoned climbers, it was a place where confidence could falter. That morning, her team moved into the Icefall early to avoid daytime warming. The section ahead had drawn concern. 3 ladders lashed together across a wide gap, sagging under their own weight. Guides urged climbers to move slowly and in rhythm. A few had hesitated, remarking on the creaking of the ladders and the visible darkness of the crevasse beneath. Yet the expedition pressed forward. Priya clipped her harness, but witnesses later noted that one of her carabiners had not been fully secured to the main line. She stepped onto the ladder cautiously at first, then, as others watched, quickened her pace. Halfway across, her crampon slipped deep between the rungs with a metallic snap. The ladder buckled, swaying violently. Priya lurched forward, arms flailing, her scream tearing through the still air. Her right clip caught, jerking her sideways, but the improperly clipped carabiner slid free under strain. In an instant, the rope went slack. Her body pitched off the ladder, slamming against the side rail before dropping into the void. The hollow crash of metal echoed, followed by the sight of her vanishing into blackness. Climbers froze in place, voices calling her name. One Sherpa scrambled to the edge, only to see fragments of ice collapsing where she had struck the wall on the way down. The sound of crampons scraping ice carried upward and then cut off sharply. After that, nothing. The team waited, still clipped in, shaken. Attempts to lower a rope revealed no purchase. The crevasse was too deep and unstable, and ice cracked under minimal tension. The guides made the decision to retreat. Her fall had been witnessed by at least 6 climbers on the same ladder section, close enough to see the failure clearly. Like many who perish on Everest, her body could not be recovered, as retrieval is often too dangerous and costly in such terrain. Her family in Delhi held a quiet prayer ritual in their apartment, away from media attention. Among mountaineers, the accident became a technical talking point. Climbers circulated diagrams of the ladder set up online, criticizing rushed crossings. No authority weighed in directly. It was May 21st, 2016, high on the southeast ridge of Mount Everest. Dozens of climbers were strung out along the ridge, inching forward in the thin air. By the time the sun rose higher, one climber would collapse in full view of others and never move again. Liu Fang was 42 years old, from Chengdu, China. A dedicated marathon runner, she had built her reputation through long-distance races across Asia before turning to mountaineering in her late 30s. Colleagues described her as disciplined and methodical, balancing her banking career with intense training schedules. Friends said she saw Everest as proof that years of self-control and fitness could carry her to a new arena. Her entry into mountaineering was recent but determined. She climbed in Sichuan's high ranges and joined organized expeditions to Cho Oyu and Manaslu, gaining limited high-altitude experience. By 2016, she secured a place with a Chinese commercial expedition on Everest, supported by a regional sports foundation and local sponsors who provided gear. She trained with oxygen systems at home and studied acclimatization schedules. Her experience gave her confidence, though she had never before pushed into the death zone above 26,000 feet. That morning's climb was more dangerous than most anticipated. Forecasts warned of strengthening winds later in the day, but expedition leaders decided to continue, aiming to summit before conditions deteriorated. The route was crowded, with more than 100 climbers pushing for the top. Delays at fixed ropes created bottlenecks, forcing climbers to stand still in the cold, burning oxygen. Some guides voiced concern that slower members risked exhaustion, but no one wanted to turn back so close to the goal. By the time Liu reached near the south summit, her pace had dropped sharply. Witnesses described her movements as labored, each step followed by a pause. Her mask was in place, but the sound of her coughing carried even through the wind. A fellow climber noted the wet, rattling tone, consistent with high-altitude pulmonary edema. Despite the signs, she pressed on, driven by the summit in sight only a short climb above. She vomited into the snow, streaks of blood marking the ice at her knees. Climbers behind her watched as she clawed at the slope, trying to rise, but her coordination failed. Guides attempted to encourage her to move, but she collapsed fully, her arms splayed. She gasped irregularly, then went completely limp, her chest no longer rising. The oxygen mask slid aside, frosting quickly in the cold. Efforts to lift her were futile. At that altitude, physical exhaustion and the slope's narrowness made sustained rescue impossible. The line of climbers stalled, some waiting in silence, while others stepped around her body, clipped to the fixed rope. Multiple climbers later confirmed her final moments, seeing her collapse against the ridge before the line resumed its slow push toward the summit. Within minutes, frost and rime quickly formed on her clothing and hair in the harsh wind, rather than snow drifting across her. Her body remained high on the ridge, too dangerous to remove. In Chengdu, her running partners staged a silent lap around their training track, leaving flowers at the finish line. Meanwhile, Chinese mountaineering collectives argued fiercely over whether her guides should have turned her back earlier, with the debate eclipsing any formal government statement. It was April 28, 2017, in Nepal's Khumbu Icefall, just above base camp on the route to Mount Everest. Climbers at Camp Y had begun settling into tents, believing they had a few hours of rest before continuing their acclimatization. The sound of the ice fall was never quiet, but on that morning it carried an edge, groaning and shifting. Hannah Collins was 31, an outdoor instructor from Manchester, England. She had spent nearly a decade leading school groups and private clients across the Alps and Scottish Highlands, building a reputation for patience and careful guidance. She often spoke about the satisfaction of seeing her students push beyond their comfort zones. Everest was not part of her work, but her own ambition, a chance to prove she could stand among the highest peaks she had long taught others to respect. Her climb was financed through savings and modest sponsorship from a UK outdoor clothing company she had worked with during training courses. The support was limited but symbolic, reinforcing her image as both a professional guide and committed mountaineer. Hannah was skilled in rope systems, avalanche awareness, and crevasse rescue. Yet Everest's icefall posed challenges far beyond her usual terrain. The labyrinth of towers and unstable ice blocks required aluminum ladders strung across chasms and constant movement through areas known for collapses. On that day, the risk was higher than most realized. Warm temperatures the afternoon before had loosened parts of the glacier, and Sherpas voiced concern about traversing so late in the morning. Still, the expedition pressed on, aiming to establish acclimatization at Camp 1. By mid-morning, tents were being pitched and climbers unpacked stoves when the first sharp cracks echoed across the slope, sounding closer and sharper than usual. Some dismissed the sounds as distant seracs breaking, but a few grew uneasy, scanning the slopes above. Suddenly, a massive block of ice sheared off from a higher serac, plummeting with a deafening roar. Snow and shattered ice exploded outward, carrying a blast of wind that knocked tents askew. Hannah, kneeling by her tent tightening a guy line, had no time to react. A jagged fragment struck her shoulder, spinning her against the tent pole before she was slammed into the snow. Heavy ice blocks and dense snow slammed down around her in a chaotic surge, burying her instantly. Dusty snow filled the air, and visibility dropped to near zero. Climbers around her were thrown off balance, some diving behind debris, while others were dragged along by the force of the collapse. Screams echoed through the cloud of ice and powder. When the noise settled and the snow drifted briefly aside, several tents were crushed and climbers shaken. Rescue efforts began immediately, guided by shouts and avalanche probes. Hannah was uncovered hours later, motionless beneath fragmented ice and compressed snow. The size and weight of the blocks had left no chance of survival, and her injuries indicated blunt trauma from the impact rather than burial alone. Her funeral in Manchester was attended by dozens of former students who remembered her guidance. On the mountain, climbers built a small stone cairn at Camp 1 in her honor, a fragile gesture soon swallowed by shifting snow. Nepalese authorities, meanwhile, issued a brisk weather advisory, treating the avalanche as an expected hazard rather than an avoidable tragedy. It was May 21st, 2018, on the northeast ridge of Mount Everest. Climbers moved in single file, headlamps still visible in the early light, their progress slowed by the thinning atmosphere. The ridge was narrow, with sheer drops on either side. Sophia Andersson was 27, a graduate student from Gothenburg, Sweden. She was pursuing advanced studies in environmental physiology and had built her identity around endurance. Marathons, long-distance cycling, and winter treks had all filled her years leading up to this climb. Friends described her as disciplined, but eager to prove herself in physical extremes. Everest represented a personal milestone, a way to blend her academic interest in human limits with a feat she hoped would define her 20s. Her place on the international expedition was funded largely through her own savings, though she had received discounted equipment from a Swedish company outdoor brand interested in using her story for marketing. For Sophia, the climb was less about sponsorship and more about validation, though she admitted to colleagues that the pressure to succeed added weight. The climb itself demanded specialized gear, oxygen systems, insulated boots with crampons, and harnesses clipped to fixed ropes. On the northeast ridge, climbers faced steep exposed sections where fatigue and thin air magnified every error. The final push that morning was unusually risky. Wind forecasts had been marginal, with gusts predicted to rise by midday. Yet the team pressed on in order to reach the summit window before the season closed. Above 27,000 feet, every step was slow, each breath labored even with oxygen. Several Sherpas had urged climbers to stay close, warning that prolonged stops could be dangerous. Despite these cautions, Sophia appeared restless, moving in ways that unsettled those behind her. Witnesses later described the change as gradual. At first, she slowed, pausing with her hands on her knees. Then she began muttering, her words uneven. Instead of laughing, she tugged repeatedly at her gloves and harness, her hands trembling, ignoring calls from teammates to keep them on. The team leader called for her to clip into the fixed line properly, but she swayed and stepped sideways near the ridge's edge. Her behavior quickly shifted from fatigue to confusion. She wandered a few feet off the main path, smiling faintly but unsteady, her movements lacking coordination. She stumbled once, caught herself, then wavered again. Climbers shouted for her to stop. One Sherpa lunged forward, but within a heartbeat she slipped and her body dropped away over the edge. In a final moment, those watching saw her vanish instantly, the fall abrupt and final, her figure swallowed by the void below. Search efforts were impossible. The cliff beneath the ridge was sheer and inaccessible, with debris falling constantly. Sherpas secured the area, but no trace of her could be reached. The team descended in silence, shaken by the suddenness of what they had witnessed. Later accounts from climbers confirmed her erratic movements and final fall, offering stark evidence of altitude-induced disorientation. Her remains were never recovered from the cliffs. In Gothenburg, her university held a seminar where doctors explained the neurological effects of hypoxia, framing her death less as a personal failing than a physiological inevitability. Fellow students wept quietly in the audience, while climbing operators in Tibet mentioned her case only in technical briefings about oxygen use. It was May 23, 2018, on the South Col route of Mount Everest. The thin line of climbers moved slowly above the Hillary step, their progress stalled by a bottleneck. Each minute spent waiting drained energy and burned precious oxygen. Maria Torres, 36, came from Madrid, Spain. She worked as an accountant for a logistics firm, though her free time was spent outdoors. She was known for her discipline, often hiking long trails in the Pyrenees or traveling to South America for high-altitude treks. Friends described her as organized and determined, the type who approached challenges with steady planning. Everest had been her goal for years, representing both a personal achievement and a way of proving her resilience. Her climb was arranged through a large commercial outfitter, which had secured permits for dozens of clients. Maria carried standard gear, insulated down suit, double-layered boots with crampons, and an oxygen system with spare bottles managed by Sherpa support. The South Col route was crowded that season, with climbers funneling through fixed ropes on narrow ridges. Even experienced mountaineers had little control over pace when stuck behind slower teams, and the risk of delays was well known. On summit day, Maria began her push shortly after midnight. Conditions were marginal but considered manageable. Forecasts had warned of increasing winds by afternoon, but guides urged teams to move quickly and seize the summit window before it closed. By dawn, she had reached the balcony, slower than some but still steady. As she climbed higher, however, the line of climbers grew denser. By the time she reached the ridge near the Hillary step, traffic slowed to a crawl. The bottleneck stretched for hours. Climbers reported shuffling forward a few steps before waiting again, oxygen masks fogging as their bottles drained faster than planned. Maria was seen leaning heavily on her poles, conserving energy, but her pace slowed further. Sherpas urged her to stay alert and continue moving, yet the queue left little room to maneuver. Above 28,000 feet, time spent standing still became as dangerous as climbing itself. As the hours dragged on, her condition worsened. Witnesses described her face turning pale beneath her goggles, lips darkening. She swayed, knees buckling, and at one point slumped forward onto her pack. A Sherpa clipped her securely to the rope and tried to rouse her, shaking her shoulder. She opened her eyes briefly, but could not rise. Other climbers, pressed by the narrow path, were forced to step around her. Moments later, her decline turned sudden. Without warning, she jerked upright, her body convulsing, then collapsed violently sideways against the fixed rope. Her mask tore free, the hiss of escaping oxygen loud in the thin air. Her head struck the ice with a hollow thud, and her limbs twitched before going rigid. Sherpas rushed to replace her body, but her chest no longer moved. Within minutes, frost began to form on her open lips. At that altitude, further effort was impossible. She had succumbed where she fell, her body left seated and slumped against the rope as the line of climbers edged past. Her funeral in Madrid was subdued. Her body left on the mountain as recovery was impossible. Spanish newspapers ran brief but pointed editorials linking her death to overcrowding, framing it as a systemic problem rather than an individual miscalculation. Nepalese officials stayed silent at the time, but among Sherpa guides, her name was spoken with respect but also resignation. Another client lost to forces they could not control. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.